Hi, this is Dark Journalist. Today's show will stay in your memory for a long time. We have the legendary investigative reporter, author, and Emmy Award-winning TV producer Linda Moulton Howe joining us. Now, Linda has just released an expanded edition of her classic book, An Alien Harvest. In her groundbreaking career, she's covered the most controversial issues, from cattle mutilation to contact with extraterrestrial life, and the government cover-up of advanced UFO technology. Now, in this special extended episode, we'll trace the high points of Linda's fascinating work, but she'll also share her new research on ET resurrection technology, the influence of positive and negative alien entities, and what may be behind the DNA hybridization program that's underway right now. You don't want to miss this one. Here we go. Investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe, ET resurrection and interdimensional war.
I'm Fife Symington. In 1997, during my second term as governor of Arizona, I saw something that defied logic and challenged my reality. I witnessed a massive delta-shaped craft that silently navigated over the Squaw Peak area in North Phoenix in the evening, and it was truly breathtaking.
We are dealing with other intelligences interacting with this planet, not just now, but long into the past. If you guys in the government and military think that you have control over the interaction of extraterrestrials from wherever they come with humans, you're kidding yourself.
You know, I've always felt that the serious journalist who was interested in exposing the UFO reality was beset by powerful forces from the outset. From government officials who don't want the truth known, to a corporate media that only shows what it's allowed to show, religious and institutional forces, and finally the off-world visitors themselves are in no great hurry to reveal their presence to an already confused world. That's why a person like Linda Moulton Howe is so valuable to our understanding of a true universal view in the 21st century. Her courage, curiosity, and professionalism have proven that she's the exception to the rule when it comes to penetrating this veil of secrecy. So let's get started. Linda, it's wonderful to have you here. Of course, your amazing reports on Coast to Coast AM radio and Dreamland are some of the most innovative, cutting-edge investigative journalism that's out there.
Thank you.
Now, we have so many good things to cover, but I wanted to start off with your early documentary film, which was a real breakthrough on the connection between cattle mutilations and the UFO reality, called A Strange Harvest. Now, this was so advanced, and I watched it again last night and was just struck by how well it holds up, even now, some years later. It's a very powerful documentary film.
Well, thank you very much. I guess by the time I did that, I had done so much documentary. See, I graduated from Stanford in '68 and made films there for 2 years.
Okay.
I was working at KNBC in daily news, generating stories. And then I was hired to do documentaries at KNBC. And then I was married then, and my husband accepted to go back to Harvard to get another degree. And there I was hired by the ABC station to do ABC's weekly medical and then science. And then the Peabody that I was the producer in I was producing science and medical programs every single week. It was a tremendous amount of work.
Oh, yeah.
Then my husband graduated, took a position with Time Inc. in their brand new, it's hard to believe now, it was brand new cable. They were just inching their way out into cable.
Right.
Got an assignment in Denver, and I was producing for the medical, it was syndication, medical syndication at WCVB in Boston. We leave, go to Denver. I had a brand new baby, but I made some phone calls to the TV stations just to see, without really much, just what might be open. And the CBS station came to you. You're Linda Moulton Howe? Well, we have from a syndicator yesterday left on my desk medical programming that ABC is trying to syndicate, and your name's on this.
Unbelievable.
He said, seriously, this is how he said, yeah, come down. I'd rather hire the producer than buy this. And that's how I was hired to be director of special projects. And so I just kept going from one bigger fire to another. And so by the time that I started trying to get to the bottom of animal mutilations at a strange harvest, I mean, I'd been producing short and long form for television from 68 to 79. That falls when I started. So I had 11 years of doing, and had won already 2 or 3 Emmys and the Peabody and all this other stuff. And that's not this kind of thing. It just means that out of Stanford, it was a very good program, and it made us do everything. And I was the only female in a class of 27 guys.
Yeah, well, you never seem to shy away from the really big challenges. And even in your early investigative reporting, you're right there pushing the envelope. Now, A Strange Harvest, for example, the title alone, right off the bat, conjures up the most disturbing and challenging images. So I guess it's really that combination of your experience in TV production, along with this edgy, kind of controversial subject matter, that makes that such a unique piece of work.
Well, and that's why I'm thinking back at the time when I did that, I knew that I had to get on the road with only a sound man and a cameraman. That's all we had, and they had to be umbilical together. And that I had certain sheriffs, certain ranchers, a journalist. I had dots on a map. And we started in the station wagon, driving up. I think the first place we went was Wyoming, so I could talk with Leo Sprinkle, interview the rancher who had this big, huge craft come down right over and had mutilations where the craft had been.
And that's Dr. Leo Sprinkle in the movie, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he was very important in the 70s. Into the 80s, but especially Leo was in the trenches on abductions way before Bud Hopkins.
That's interesting. You know, I was surprised to see that you had an actual hypnotic regression of an abductee in A Strange Harvest. That's a very early example of someone using that method to extract memories of an alien encounter. Two, right.
One, the rancher in Bosler, and then the end, Judy Doherty, because that was the clincher.
Oh, yeah.
But what I mean is we're driving to places where I, as a producer, writer, director, editor, and reporter, all I've got is the questions. Who or what is killing and mutilating these animals and why? That was my only grounding theme everywhere we went. So that would be the anchor in every location without any answers, and that each spot that we went to, whatever unfolded, was completely wild.
Right.
And we stayed up all night several times, and the truth was, I'd done a lot of difficult things. I had had a very intense life up to then. And then I was just like somebody pulled into 6th gear.
Uh-huh.
When I did A Strange Harvest, it literally, sleep was an irritation. And it was 9 months of never stopping. I probably have never done anything like it since. It was like you went to work and 9 months later, you went home. It has that feeling. It was that intense. And nothing was nailed down. Nothing was scripted. Everything was moving from day to day on what you learned this day that would take you to the next day.
That's interesting.
And so it was as pure documentary existence as you could possibly get on a subject that the questions outweighed proof. But the physical evidence was the largest body of physical evidence of extraterrestrials interacting with this planet there could possibly be. And that when the very first sheriff that I talked to said, Linda, let me save you some time, knew my work at Channel 7, the perpetrators are creatures from outer space.
Oh.
I can still remember it felt like I had been hit by a 220 volt circuit when he said that. I wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that 99.5% of 7 billion people on this planet are not prepared for that fact.
Oh, absolutely.
And so everything that I've tried to do since, because when it was broadcast, it was like a bomb went off.
Right.
It's just like, there's no computers, there's no faxes, remember that.
Yeah.
The work we were doing, still using payphones. Payphones,
Wow.
country roads.
Incredibly raw and low tech.
You know, you've got your camera and your audio tape, and those guys better be preserving. This is film that has to go to a lab.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that. If it's too hot or too cold, you've destroyed all your work.
Oh, that's wild.
People have no idea.
I can't even imagine. But this is investigative filmmaking on the edge, right? It's very exciting, but it's also volatile and dangerous in a sense. Now, I know, for example, that this put you on the radar for some of these covert intelligence agencies. You know, as soon as this came out, boom, you're dealing with all this surveillance and scrutiny. And that's pretty much when that started. So for better or for worse, you got their attention.
Yeah, I was marked. And it explained why, starting in fall of 79, when I made a call to the Central Intelligence Agency, that's how dumb and innocent I was.
Oh.
I called them because somebody that I had interviewed, a sheriff, I believe, said that he knew that the CIA was involved. And it's really a comment. I was born and raised in a period of time where to be an American in the United States was to assume without question that you really were allowed to do anything within the legal limits of laws, but no subject was off limits. That when we traveled to another country, I think it's fair to say, it's not a fair perspective, but I think it's fair to say, Americans did think that they were superior to everybody else on the planet because we were born out of, by, and for the people.
Yes.
And that today these words seem childish.
Well, that is fascinating, the degree to which the perception has changed. And I think we can all agree that there's an agenda that's moving forward there. But there is something in your research and reporting, and I think I can trace it from A Strange Harvest. There's some quality there that I think goes beyond journalistic curiosity. And it has led you on this astonishing journey into these deep mysteries. So I guess my question is, why cattle mutilations? How did that become the subject that drew you in and led you to these other worlds?
I guess I want to find out what it is, and I'd like to see it stopped.
I see.
The bloodless, senseless, weird death of these animals. I suppose that's where I started. Why is this happening? Who is doing it? And how can it be stopped? And here we are in February of 2015, 35 and counting years later, in the miles that I have walked.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's that same energy and same motivation that we had that's part of who I am. that wanted to cut through, again, government bullying, whether it's CIA, NSA bullying, or state patrol people with guns.
Right.
It's bullying. And that the entire character and nature of the United States of America is hanging in a delicate balance right now as we speak.
Well, I know that you're very concerned about the changes in tone and policy in the American government over the last decade or so. And I can see that this keeps popping up in your reporting, even when that's not what the report is about. So I'm perceiving that this is a key consideration for you now.
Well, it's where we started. If this is a country that still has a constitution, a Bill of Rights, a Declaration of Independence, and nobody that I know has been able to demonstrate that that was changed, and we're sitting at 250, 60 years in as a country. And if a coup d'etat did occur with the assassination of John F. Kennedy because he wanted to open up the extraterrestrial truth,
right,
which is Jim Mars and I and others have been exposed to as being the real reason he was assassinated.
Well, it makes you wonder.
Then, what country have we been living in since 1963? How much sham and camouflage by forces that don't want to be identified are in control from the NSA, CIA, DIA, and all the alphabet soup, that there is a heavy-handed control on what the public and the media are allowed to receive, and that which is not politically acceptable to the power group is criticized, made fun of, characterized in the UFO area as swamp gas and weather balloons, when they know that it's not, because they are out actively trying to get this stuff and actively back engineer it. And there are too many people who have served in firsthand capacities that have testified to this, to several of us firsthand before they died, with nothing to gain.
That's true.
Now, I've been a TV producer, writer, director, editor, and a journalist in lots of media. And in today, Earth Files is sort of my crossroads to deal with lots of different subjects, science, environment, and real X-Files.
And earthfiles.com is just an amazing site. It's so informative and it's really fantastic.
Thank you very much. But it all comes back. I guess I don't want to know that I'm living a phony, false, concocted democracy.
Yeah.
But right now in 2015, I think that's what we have. And right now going forward, and at the root of all of this, I think, is the whole issue that Truman and Eisenhower and Churchill knew in World War II, that those silver things, whether they were disc shaped or spheres or lights, that could do this, literally, here'd be an RAF flyer, and these things would do this around the plane, and pilots would report back, we've got documents. And they knew. Anybody with adult intelligence knew this was defying the physics of the 40s.
Oh, yeah.
And these were very bright men. And I think very patriotic men to their two countries. And that the truth, if the truth were known in the hearts and the souls of those men, they would really feel that it was their super patriotic duty to lie in order to keep a peaceful public in the throes of World War II, because they knew that was going on during the war.
Yeah.
And the documents reflect that. So if it is true, what's in some of the documents released by the Ministry of Defense 5 years ago, at least one security guard heard Churchill and Eisenhower talking about the UFOs and how a lid had to be put on the subject for 2 generations. This is Churchill to Eisenhower. And a generation by a political science book in college would be defined as 25 years.
Okay, so 50 years.
Years. And what's 50 plus? Let's say that the year that this occurred was 44. Let's say it's a year before the war ended.
Okay, yeah.
So somewhere around 93 to 94, those 50 years would have come to an end. And what is so interesting is that that is a period of time when I remember myself and others feeling like it's going to crack. The signs are moving. They're going to tell the truth.
Uh-huh.
And 93 came and 94 came. There's a lot happening. I could tell you a lot of things that were happening, but no big public statement. And in 1997, March 13th, over Phoenix came a whole wave of things starting at about 7 o'clock in the evening. That was the 2-mile long triangle. And a bunch of people saw it in that half hour from about 7 to 7:30, 7:40.
This is the Phoenix Lights case.
Yeah, but it was a whole series of things. And the most important, I think, was the big triangle.
Yes, okay.
There is no such thing as putting anything 2 miles long up in the air, completely silent, and have it move. It's not human.
Absolutely.
Possible.
Well, the Phoenix Lights was an amazing event because, at least at the beginning, the press actually covered it, which was shocking in itself.
Well, they had to, because many people who were videotaping,
Yeah.
calling up the TV stations. And if you were in Phoenix at that time for those 2 or 3 hours, you could walk outside and you'd see something in the sky, which a lot of people did.
Right. No question.
It is amazing that after that night and all of that publicity, all of the doors that felt like that they had started to open in the early 90s just went. Everything shut down.
That is so strange.
And one source who I would never, I don't think he would have the ability to prove, and I certainly don't have the ability to prove. But one source got in touch with me a day or two after March 13th, 1997 in New Jersey, who was under contract for the Department of Defense to make boutique computers. And then it was that, say, DOD had X challenge, this company could make something just for that challenge. That's why they call them boutique computers.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he said, I want you to know that I got a call about what was happening in Phoenix. And he said, simultaneously that night, one of our critical DOD satellites was fried by an unknown.
Wow, by an unknown.
And you're not going to see that in the headlines of the New York Times.
No. As a matter of fact, the military response on this was ludicrous. First, they said it wasn't happening. And then they said, oh, yes, it's just some flares. Move along. But of course, it was there, hovering over the city. And even the governor later came out and said, yes, I saw it also. And then it looked otherworldly. So in a sense, the Phoenix Lights is probably one of the most relevant UFO cases now because it happened somewhat recently and there were so many witnesses. Actually, an entire major city in America was looking at this mystery.
There were waves of things happening. And I was on the air with Art Bell. It was either that night or the night after.
Right.
With the family, 5 people who saw the 2-mile triangle, and then the real estate people, they saw it. And it became very clear early on, if you were talking with witnesses who were there, that starting around 7 o'clock on the Phoenix clock and coming around to about 7:30, 7:40 is this huge triangle. Silent, low. The family, they could see line grooves in geometric patterns on the base of this thing.
Huh.
Then, starting in this next wave from about 7:40 going to 8:30, 9 o'clock, those were the bows of lights over Phoenix, the ones that made television. Then, somewhere between 9:30 to 10:30, a truck driver coming into Phoenix, not knowing anything about what's going on, sees two pumpkin orange globes over what would be Luke Air Force Base. And they are so big and they are so bright and so astonishing that he gets on his truck radio trying to get a hold of somebody. What is this over the Air Force Base? And while he's in his truck trying to radio people, these big orange things go. In other words, that's what he used on the phone with me. He said they just, like one of those pop-outs, right?
That's fast.
Who's in something that can be in a stationary position and then literally almost disappear going up so fast, right? So there were at least these three phases. And it went on then for at least 3 hours or so. And the only part that penetrated through the media to the public were the arcs of lights.
Yes.
The others, a lot of us were trying to report, but it shows that almost minds, and maybe Churchill and Eisenhower were right, that there's been such strong government denial that the vast majority of people are willing to just accept, well, there's nothing to it. The video was vivid. So the video of the arc of lights and them going on and off was something that they could see very clearly. No one had good video of the 2-mile-long triangle. And how many people do you know right now that if you said, I was on a hill and a thing that was shaped like a triangle and it didn't make any sound came right over me and I timed it and it had to be 2 miles long. How many people would believe it?
Well, in everyday life, the sad truth is probably very few.
Then the government says,
Oh boy.
We're home free again because we are dealing with other intelligences interacting with this planet, not just now, but long into the past, with agendas that are probably incomprehensible. And that the super patriotic position is you keep everybody dumb and blind and happy. We adults will take what we can get from extraterrestrial technology, and we will make it into semiconductors and laser technology, and we will make all this money, and we will have all of this domination in technology. And eventually, in a century or 2 or 3 or 5, it won't matter, because then we'll all be gone. It will be a history no one knew. And everybody will just be in the future where extraterrestrials of all kinds, and we'll be moving among the stars, and we will be moving among the stars and the technology that we back engineered from what we lied to everybody about. And that is essentially the essence of what I understand is going on. But
there is a danger to it.
Absolutely. When you lie, when governments lie, when leaders lie, when an entire world is based on lies, I just think we're in a universe where eventually there is some sort of karmic due. And that if I hadn't been raised the the way I was as an American, and I mean that with the deepest respect.
Yes.
The last thing I ever would have thought as a child is that the police, the military, and the president would be lying about most everything to protect something so fundamental as we're not alone in the universe, and that all kinds of intelligences have been coming and going and terraforming and building and would explain so many of the mysteries of the Sphinx and the pyramids and Stonehenge and on and on. I'm excited by wanting to know what the real truth is. I'm excited, not afraid, of having every single thing that we've ever been taught about our history turned upside down if we could be told the truth, and that it would include what is the truth about the evolution of primates into Homo sapiens sapiens.
Uh-huh.
And it's not what we've been taught.
So the ET question is really the ultimate untouchable.
Well, the governments have wanted it to be that way since World War II, and they've been very effective. Remember, counterintelligence in World War II, England and the United States, Australia and Canada, those main allies, those were some of the brightest minds there were. You have to be extremely bright. You have to be able to accommodate all kinds of contradictions. Really good in counterintelligence.
Yeah.
But what is counterintelligence's goal? During the war, it was to camouflage, to completely throw the Nazis into confusion about what was being done. Confusion is the ally of counterintelligence. Those same people that got us through World War II, and God bless them, are exactly the same people that go into the Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy administrations with one huge responsibility to keep the public and the media at an arm's length distance for the foreseeable future from a truth that our governments were dealing with, that extraterrestrial biological entities were interacting with the planet then, they knew they had in the past and would be in the future, and we are now in the 21st century, and nothing has changed about the reality. But the government's policy of denial has been one of the firm nails in the United States, I would say, from what we were born to be, was a nation that would evolve on principle, with morality, of by and for people, in which the government would serve. Seems so quaint to say that now. The government would serve the people.
Right.
And you and I and every listener knows the United States Americans, the British, English, the Australians, even the Canadians. The tax dollars serve the government.
Yeah.
It's been turned upside down. But nobody in government ever wants to acknowledge the Constitution was shredded without any war and no formal act. The people are serving the government. That's the truth.
Right, and that seems to be the prevailing trend. So it's important to look at how the government cover-up of the ET presence fits with this emerging landscape.
I think that at the heart of the entire extraterrestrial question, and remember, I started in something that's very difficult and repulsive, animal mutilations.
Right, that's such a challenging place to start from, I would imagine.
And having no idea exactly where I was going to end up.
Did it ever cross your mind that it was just too much to get involved in?
If they had been horrific, if there had been lots of blood, probably I'm going to say something that is only speculative about myself and back 35 years ago, but probably the idea that it was satanic cults mucking around with something horrific, I would never have touched it.
Yeah.
It was being with a deputy and a sheriff going to the first mutilation with the crew. And the deputies say, take a look at this. And there on the ground is a black and white steer. It is sheen perfect, meaning every hair, it's just perfect, lying on its right side. And there was a circle of hide that was removed from the eye. If you took a compass in 6th grade and you made yourself a circle and you were able to lift that hide out, it was that perfect.
Wow.
The eyeball is gone, the eyelids are gone, everything is gone. You're looking at bone inside of the most perfect circle. There's not one ragged edge. And the deputies are showing us, and we're filming this, that the tongue is gone, the right jaw flesh is gone. Where the penis and the testicles had been, there was a perfect oval. And there was not a jagged edge, and the skin underneath. I knew what lumen tissue was of her muscle. That's that thin, tissuey white stuff that's called lumen.
Uh-huh.
It's there. That means that something had the ability to take the hide with the organ out and not even penetrate the thin white tissue with the muscle below.
Oh, it's amazing. Even the most advanced laser surgery couldn't do that.
Well, and then you get the problem, as I learned later, lasers. We're on a planet that is a carbon-based life form. And you take any laser in any surgery to a horse, to a cow, to a cat, to a human, it doesn't matter. And then you take the tissue that has been cut with a laser and you put it under a microscope. You're going to see what look like little black pepper grains all over it, because this is a fact of biology. You can't apply laser heat to carbon-based tissue without generating carbon that can be seen under a microscope.
Uh-huh.
And I think I personally went out to maybe 30 different animals, gathered up tissue in formalin, get it FedEx back to Dr. John Altschuler in Denver, the pathologist, hematologist. And one day he called me up and he said, I'm really puzzled about something. I would really like you to come to the lab. And he had this beautiful lab. And he had a stereoscope where one person could sit here and one person could sit here so they could compare notes on the same tissue or different tissue. So he said, look here on the right, and then look on the left and tell me, what do you see that's different? And he had not front loaded this. He hadn't said where any of it. He just said, what do you see? And I said, well, the one on the right looks like it has pepper on it, and I don't see it on the left. And he said, that's exactly right. He said, this is tissue that you collected at X site, and this is where I'm looking at the tissue from the cow on the right that has the black. And he said, here in the left, these are photomicrographs or microscope images that I have gotten from, I think it was a gynecologist. And remember, laser surgery, that wasn't even done
Right.
in 70s and barely 80s, right?
Sure.
But by the time like around 89, 88, 87, somewhere in there, gynecologists were using lasers in gynecology surgery. And that's how he had gotten these slides from a gynecologist so that he could compare. The idea is that organic tissue is organic tissue. And a cow and a human are only 4% different in the chromosomal DNA sequence anyway.
All right.
And he looked at me, I'll never forget, he said, Linda, I do not know what this cutting instrument is, because whatever is taking this tissue in these animals, it isn't leaving carbon residue. Later on, I talked with a guy, 5 years ago, who said for the very first time, this is 2015 now, so this would have been around 2010, somebody contacted me, would not go on the record, not even now on this, want you to know we are using acoustical scalpels in the Air Force on X, Y, and Z. And they think this is the answer to your question. We are not producing carbon residue with the acoustical scalpel.
Huh. Well, there's the advanced technology.
Yeah, but this is...
But 30 years later.
Exactly.
All right.
So
this is potentially the alien technology they got their hands on, reverse engineered it, and now they know how to use it.
Well, my point was, it's extraterrestrials have been doing the animal mutilations.
Yeah.
That's what law enforcement. One of the things that I think is so difficult, whether it's books, television, radio, what we're doing, if I could take you or anybody listening, and I could put you in my shoes in 1979 and walk you at night through grass into a pasture where there is an animal that is lying on one side with the same pattern of excisions that you are seeing, animal after animal after animal, no blood anywhere, no tracks around the animals, which mean they have to have been lowered from someplace onto the ground. That's why I dedicated my first book, An Alien Harvest, to law enforcement. And I said, who have seen and ask why. They knew. Sheriff Tex Graves, when I went up to see him that would have been my first interview in September of 79, not with the camera, just to interview background. And he showed me all of these color Polaroids that he had taken with his own camera of all of these animals that were, he said, I started having nightmares.
Yeah.
And he was telling me about the day that he called a veterinarian to come out. It was one of the very first mutilated animals. And he wanted the necropsy to be done right there in the field. And when the vet got down, and I've been through a necropsy, and it's just like when guys take a car apart.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for a veterinarian doing a necropsy. They make very neat incisions, and they just know how to start taking things out and stack all of the organs in the various pieces, and they examine as they go, and then you get down into the chest. And when this veterinarian with Tex Graves, the sheriff of Logan County, right there taking photos, the sheriff said, he called me over and I'm looking down and there's no heart, Linda. This is a big animal, about 1,800 pounds. The heart of a grown adult, it's about 11 by 7 by 9 inches. A cow's heart is very big. So the necropsy is coming from the outside in. You still have all these bones. The vet is not removing the bones.
Right.
He's coming in and around in the back, and they can look in. There's no heart.
Well, it would have to be such fantastically advanced technology which could do that.
With an animal in the field, it was warm to touch when they got there, which means it was dead only 2, 3, 4 hours. And there's no heart, and the vet went in because there was what he thought looked like, and it turned out to be, every heart, you have one, I do, the outside of the heart has a pericardium, which is a basically transparent, thin, like a protective sac. The sac, the pericardial sac, was collapsed in the chest
Whoa.
of this animal that the sheriff is watching the vet do the necropsy from the outside in.
So they extracted the heart, but left the protective shield.
The pericardium, it surrounded it.
Wow. Incredible precision.
Not a single cut, not a hole, not any clotted blood. The vet into the carotid, those big arteries and veins coming into the heart should have had clotted blood.
Definitely.
They couldn't find any, right? The vet stood up and said to Sheriff Tex Graves that he said to me, "Don't ask me to come out on another one of these animal mutilations. There's no way I'm ever going to stand up in front of reporters and try to explain what cannot be explained," and walked off. This is good. Yeah. This was my baptism into this field, was hearing this from the sheriff. And then he said, "Let me do you a favor. The perpetrators of animal mutilations are creatures from outer space." That was the phrase I kept hearing back in 79 to 80.
Huh.
And anybody hearing that today who has not been exposed to the facts that I have and the people in all of the 35 years and seems like billions of miles of walking in this story, you hear something like that and you don't have a paradigm for it, because government counterintelligence, under orders, this is their job, has made it so perfectly disconnected from Roswell on. Weather balloons, nothing to it. People throwing pie pans in the air, all of the stuff you've heard.
Right. So these absurd explanations have been put forward to control the perception. So it seems like at that point in your work, you became aware that there were two different realities operating side by side, which must have been a major jump in your own awareness, I would imagine.
Thank you for getting that.
Well, it must have been exciting and unnerving. As I went back and watched A Strange Harvest again, and now hearing you speak about the process, you can feel the tension of those two worlds in the documentary.
What was the single most vivid residue in your own mind and soul after you watched A Strange Harvest?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd say what first struck me about it was the precision of the animal mutilations and the testimony of the sheriff describing how confusing it was. But I guess for me, it's the hypnotic regression of Judy Doherty because of her fear as a mother for her child, because they had been abducted together with this farm animal.
Calf. It's a little calf.
Calf, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's actually what I'd like to go to now, which is, you had pretty convincing scientific evidence that this was an extraterrestrial phenomena. The next question is, what did you deduce they were doing with these experiments?
Well, I think when I did A Strange Harvest, by the time I finished and it was broadcast, I think Leo Sprinkle, who was the head of counseling and testing at the University of Wyoming, and he had worked with me on one of the sequences having to do with the rancher in Bosler, Wyoming, who had this big, huge orange kind of fluorescent craft hover over a ridge. We went up on that ridge, the crew and I, and he had suffered 2 mutilations and a cow disappearance. And while we were there, we saw a red light that came up over the ridge and then went straight down. That's not astronomical. I don't know of anything in astronomy that doesn't keep doing this. So we saw some strange things. And what I'm getting to is that Leo Sprinkle, he actually started in the late 60s. He was getting people with missing time, and nobody knew. And as a PhD psychologist and working in a university,
This is before it was even popularized as a term.
Way later came. Yeah.
Yes.
Leo was in the trenches, as far as I know, before anybody else. And so he had already developed, we'll say he was looking for specific signs on things. And we had worked in Wyoming. We had worked with that rancher, mutilations, ETs, all of that. And it was the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, Carl and Jim Lorenzen. And they got in touch with me probably in April of what would have been 1980. I'm still working really hard trying to weave pieces together to do something that will be credible to broadcast on the CBS station in Denver. I'm just struggling. And I get a phone call and they say they're going to send to me an audio tape and I need to listen to it. And it's Judy Doherty in her first hypnosis session, in which she's describing a small animal in a pale beam of yellow light outside of their car in Houston. And in that hypnosis session, she could not see what it was. A lot of details. It was, and it was a hypnosis session to try to cope with her migraine headaches. So it was a medicinal kind of approach, right? She was having horrible times functioning because of headaches. The Lorenzens had that audio. I get it. I remember the day. Back then, the analog audio tapes that we all used, and I just put the tape in and I'm sitting there at my desk and listening, and I was riveted. And this is not the Leo Sprinkle, this is the first one, and I'm thinking, I am listening to somebody who has been in a pasture area where they're watching a pale beam of light lifting an animal. And it's set in motion. I call Leo. I explained to him the situation. I said, would you be willing, if I can get this woman to agree, with or without her real name, whatever condition, that this is important, that we fly to wherever she is and we do this? And he said yes. And it took quite a lot of convincing. I think everybody knows by now, I don't violate confidences. I would never, ever hurt anybody for money, for anything. People come to, I would never do that. And I think eventually, because we talk so much on the phone, that I think she began to like whatever my spirit was about why we were going to do this, and that she could sign, we would do whatever. So we went, and I was doing, to save money on the budget, I was doing audio. I had my cameraman and Leo and Judy Doherty. When we had Judy pull up, we're all in the state where Leo and the cameraman and I know each other.
Uh-huh.
We've never met Judy. I have in my mind the idea that I may finally be taken to the answer on that is, as far as I'm concerned, is a firsthand testimony in a journalistic context.
Yeah, an actual eyewitness.
And we've never met, and I know she's skittish and has every right in the world to be scared.
Right.
And I walked out the door of the station where we were doing this. And I introduced myself so that it would be just the one-on-one first. Even a camera can be very intimidating.
I can appreciate that.
And we're walking in, and she was shaking.
So she was nervous. She was shaking.
As we walked up to the door. And when I say shaking, I'm not talking about melodrama. I'm talking about something you only see. In my case, I think I've seen it only 3 times, 2 on men and on her. The whole, everything. It's not huge. It's that you are in the presence of somebody that is like their skin is shaking.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that at their heart and their core, they're terrified. They're just terrified. And none of us knew what was going to happen. But I trusted Leo. I trusted him that he would, all of his experience, this was going to be difficult, but we were with about the best that we could possibly have in the planet. And we start. And I can run only so long, reel to reel. My cameraman can only go so long on batteries.
Oh.
And here's Leo. Here's me with the audio. Here's the cameraman. And here is Judy Doherty. And we tried to make it as comfortable, but she's nevertheless, we're in a circle. And she's in this chair. And we were rocking and rolling through Leo's skills for 4 hours.
That's a long time.
And in the beginning, and I've learned if it's real, if you're in real hypnosis with a really traumatized person, and I've been through quite a few of these now.
Okay.
You might as well just know that for the first half hour at least, and maybe an hour, it's like an airplane that's up here at 30,000 feet. And it wants to land down here. And you go around and around, and the skilled hypnosis person is listening for the right sentence that might be the doorway into the fear, the blocks. And here is so interesting. The documentary and my book lays out an alien harvest has the entire 100% transcript done in sections as the 4 hours went.
Wow.
You can see as you read it how it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And at one point in one of those, we'll call it trying to get down to where we're really going to be inside of her mind, she said, I think I'm in 2 places at once. I'm on the ground outside my car, but I'm in that little round room looking down.
Uh-huh.
That was the key to Leo Sprinkle in all of his experience. That was where he took off with asking questions that eventually she went to a place where she's no longer there or just looking out. She's now in the situation. And that scene that I used at the end of A Strange Harvest, that some people have said that it is one of the most galvanizing, riveting things they have ever seen. And I agree.
Oh, yeah. She is completely, authentically freaked out.
And in that room, during those 4 hours, by the time that scene occurs, it was like something hit me, the crew, and Leo. We are now penetrating to a truth in the animal mutilations through this woman in this chair right now. This is the truth. And I still can remember that when she started pounding her hand because she was so afraid she was seeing her daughter with some of the, one of the extraterrestrials taking swabs out of the daughter's mouth, which was a genetic harvest. That is a genetic harvest.
We should say here that this case is also unique because it is a mother and daughter being abducted together. I mean, how rare is that?
That's right. The mother-daughter, it was, as far as I knew at the time, it was the only case of a mother and a daughter. The Betty and Barney Hill case had been a husband and wife in 61. This was a mother and her teenage daughter, both taken, and both remembering the pale yellow beam of light. And then crystal clear under our hypnosis with Leo, it's a brown and white calf rising in the beam of light. And then they are both in this craft, and Judy becomes extremely concerned. She was a very empathic human being. I loved her dearly. She is seeing a being that she draws. It's a gray type. And it's doing what? It is using a technology to slice tissue from a calf, eye, tongue, testicles, right in front of her. She sees her daughter in another room with another being. So what is a mother going to do? She's making 2 + 2 = 4. This is what they're doing to the calf. Oh my God, there's my daughter. They're going to do. And at that, when she starts this, no.
Yeah.
They're going to do to daughter. I stopped breathing. I literally stopped breathing because I can remember sitting there then, telling you now, I can remember staring at the audio reel from her face to the reel, just to, is there still tape? Realizing I'm not breathing. I literally had stopped.
Whoa.
And it was that kind of, you would say that was my beginning. And you have a beginning like that from where I was with the sheriff, who says the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. You work with somebody like Judy Doherty and Leo Sprinkle.
Yeah. Let's go to a clip now from A Strange Harvest. This is part of that hypnotic regression session with you, Leo Sprinkle, and Judy Doherty.
The second hypnosis session with Dr. Sprinkle occurred on March 13th, 1980.
Now you're standing outside your car. Now you're looking up. You can describe your impressions. What are your impressions?
It's like a spotlight that's shining down on the back of my car. And it's like it has substance to it. I can see an animal being taken up in this. I can see it squirming and trying to get free. And it's like it's being sucked up. It's taken into some sort of chamber. It's a little round, tiny room. And I get nauseated at watching how they excise parts. It's done very quickly, but the calf doesn't die immediately. For some reason, the calf's heart isn't taken, and I don't know. It seems like it's still living, and that upset me very much. And then I can see the calf being lowered. It's like it's being dropped back down. And when it's on the ground, it's dead. I can see that it's not moving. But I feel very sick to my stomach at what I witnessed.
That's very intriguing stuff. I'm going to tell you why I think your investigative reporting is so interesting. Now, after witnessing things like this and all the other similar types of cases you've done, I think it's fair to say that someone might have a certain attitude towards these off-world visitors, that they are hostile and potentially dangerous. But that's not where you're coming from at all, is it? I mean, you have a very different take on the whole thing.
If I could do one thing to help people on this planet right now, as we go into 2015, it would be look at me as some kind of living proof. I have literally been in both hemispheres. I have been in hundreds of pastors. I have done most of my work by myself, except when I could have a crew, because so much of this is with people who will not allow a camera, audio, and the most I could do was to take notes.
Yes.
And that the one thing I would really like people to understand, the animal mutilations have been going on for a long time, and they're going on today. But in terms of any specific intent to hurt human beings, I've never seen personally, I've never seen the evidence. I've heard people traumatized. Judy was traumatized, but she and her daughter were returned. And they may have been helped. Judy's migraine headaches went 100% away after our hypnosis session with Leo Sprinkle.
Wow.
And she had been fighting with migraine headaches from the event that began in May of 73. So we are working with her in March of 80. So for 7 years from the first event to our hypnosis session, she was debilitated by migraines. We went through the hypnosis session, they cleared up, and there were other things that I think when you read all of the transcripts, not just pieces, you read all of the transcript of what Judy said, you can't come away from the transcripts about the telepathic communication that she got from the beings that there was something very wrong on your planet. And we are trying to monitor it, and the implication was perhaps fix it.
And just to clarify this, these are the ETs that are communicating with her.
It's all in the transcript and an alien harvest, everything. She even gets the impression of a word that she associated with plutonium radiation. And what have we done? In 1945 was the very first, we'll call it the modern 5,000-year swath of humanity. We had dropped the first test atom bomb at White Sands, south of me. And that was in July, and 2 or 3 weeks later, we dropped 2 huge bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
Right.
Right now, I have a whole file just from the last 6 months of increasing numbers of science papers that are coming from quantum physicists, mathematicians, that we are on a planet in a solar system in a universe that is one of an infinite number of universes, parallel timelines, that we literally do not understand what the big cosmos with a capital C is. That the relationship between dimensions and timelines is critical to everything. Judy Doherty, other people that are in my Glimpses Volume 2 that came later, they've all had variations on the same theme. And this is from the human abduction population. And the theme is, you humans do not understand how many dimensions there are. And that if you split the atom in your dimension, you are tearing into other dimensions. You are destroying in ways that you can't comprehend because you don't understand the relationship of dimensions and time. I have heard that from an airlines pilot that was working on a project for an intel group. And he said to me, I believe him 100%. These are people who have never gone public. They've never written a book. They're not going out into the public because they can't. They've signed non-disclosure agreements.
Oh, yeah.
But when an airline pilot that's the cover. there's lots of covers, but the chips can come from the alphabet soup. And he said, one thing, he said, you really, really need to understand how complicated this is. You do understand, but he said, not all moving, glowing lights are craft. Many moving, glowing lights are tears in the membrane between universes.
Unbelievable.
Never forgotten. I was working for CNN in Atlanta in news, and this person comes to just have this 6-hour meeting, and the download was so intense, and this was one of the things that I've never forgotten. And he said, I know that our government is actively looking for where there are efforts to interject from other times, other dimensions, into this dimension and timeline. And it has to do with magnetic fields and black holes. And that when you know how to take Einsteinian space-time and go point to point, it's that I've been shown this by many people. They grasp this much, that we're dealing with intelligences that know, let's say that right here, that this is the fabric of our universe right there. And beyond, there are other universes. So my hands are the universe.
Okay.
And that we are dealing, and it's 13.9 billion light years old. So now, these advanced intelligences, Michio Kaku would call them universes 3 or 4, can take this part of the universe and they can bend the space-time, and now they're going to touch what was 13.9 billion to this part of the universe that may be the youngest, maybe where we are. They didn't have to go in Euclidean geometry. They didn't have to go 13.9 billion light years. They are bending space and time to move point to point. If you hang on to that and you jump back to 1945, July, August, non-human intelligences were coming and going on this planet before 1945. But whatever it was that provoked Einstein, and something else may have provoked Einstein to come up with energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, the essence of being able to split the atom. The very act of exploding with that much energy in this dimension, I am convinced, impacted how many, I don't know, but at least 1 or 2 other dimensions. Were the grays here before 1945? I think so. But were the tall ones or other types, were they here before 45? This was a planet that, as far as I know, from government people who are now dead, who have talked to me before they died.
Right.
We are on a planet, like many planets, it's been terraformed for millions of years for various purposes. We're not the first so-called intelligent creature. But waves of civilizations of other intelligences have come and gone. What is it now about the 21st century and the legacy of World War II specifically, and what the Germans, Hitler, and the Nazis seem to be collaborating with underground at Pienemonte that was not strictly human? Jim Marrs has done a lot of work on that. Lawrence Gardner did a lot of work on that. There's lots of people who have looked at that period and said, there is at least circumstantial evidence that the Germans and Hitler were working with something that was trying to guide Germany to take over the world for reasons that were stated by Hitler as, these are his words, putting a master race on the earth that would be tall, blonde, and blue-eyed. Where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
Why did that emerge in World War II? And why was a book written called The Golden Ring? Many people have not heard of this. The Golden Ring was about a group of psychics, is the people who are trying to use telekinesis, telepathy, in their minds to access information in maybe other dimensions and timelines.
Yeah.
And that as World War II went on, these people in the Golden Ring knew, that's what the book's about, knew that it wasn't a human war. And that they were trying to use spiritual, mental, soul methods to fight something which, if the West would be defeated, the whole world would change. That was their theme. And the Golden Ring, even though they couldn't put their hands together from France to Germany to Italy, meaning physically like this,
Right.
the idea was that they were doing it mentally.
I see.
Mentally, they were grabbing each other's hands in all of these countries, making a ring, the Golden Ring, and it got larger and larger. The book is about the week that Germany ran out of ball bearings.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
They ran out of ball bearings, and their machinery and their tanks could not. That was the turning point, and the Golden Ring insists
Wow.
that this was because they were concentrating in these other ways. Now, the link to everything else that we have been talking about comes to the questions of agendas, which you're asking.
Okay.
Why animal mutilations? Why humans have definitely been being harvested for a long time of sperm and eggs.
Uh-huh.
But humans are usually returned. But there is a huge disappearing people population also. That's a
right.
big mystery.
That's right.
The link between World War II and where we are today and all of these issues about animal mutilations, human abduction syndrome, light, beams, technology that we suddenly have had that was back engineered from extraterrestrial machines, according to Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, and all on and on and on. If there were one intelligence far superior than Homo sapiens sapien, and it wanted to do something to Earth, it could do it on its own. Humans would not be able to stop it.
Definitely not.
The very fact that World War II was as intense and strange as it was, and then the gray ones show up in craft in 40, actually before 47, the Cape Girardeau is 41. That would have been when the war was getting started in Europe. The very fact that there was a war, there was all this psychic energy to try to help the Allies, that Churchill, Eisenhower, Truman were secretly knowing that the jets had these silver things going around them. All of this is like a parallel theater to the World War II that we have seen in movies. This was there. This other was there tracking all of the way. And it has always implied to me a bottom line that I hope everybody will hold. It appears to me that there is something out there that is trying to be an ally to humanity. And in the Greek mythology, Prometheus was the Greek god who argued on the side of humans for their existence, for their creativity, for their spunk, for their energy, for their ability to live and work and function in this high oxygen atmosphere that not a lot of other planets have. There have been champions to humans no matter what our source is. If that government document that I was shown at Kirtland is correct, and it said, I've never forgotten it, extraterrestrial biological entities manipulated DNA and already evolving primates to create Homo sapiens. That would mean we are somebody else's androids. If I'm somebody else's android, I would like to meet the maker. But barring that, it seems to me that the whole big story of not just this planet, this solar system, this universe, of all universes, what is allowable to do with life? If you are advanced enough to come and scoop skin from inside a mouth, take sperm and take eggs, turn it into any container that you want, and have the ability then to put some sort of life essence, pura vida, in all that you are making and manufacturing. What is allowable to do with life is the question. Can you walk away from that life you start, that you perceive as your property, and you go somewhere else in the universe on another mission, and it stumbles around in evolutionary history, trying to understand what it is on a planet in which it feels alien? Humanity, I think, has a tremendously schizophrenic relationship to its own planet.
Oh, yeah.
And do you ever have the right to come back and annihilate that which you set in motion with consciousness and intelligence because you needed a worker bee or something? Does the cloner, the hybridizer, have the right to start conscious, intelligent life and then annihilate it when it ceases to meet its needs? Is this the political battle that is going on throughout the entire cosmos, that a lot of hybridization, a lot of cloning, a lot of androids are part of the fabric? And more movies are coming out in Hollywood about the robots, the androids, the android discovering they're an android's going to be a new film this year.
Uh-huh.
And I finally came to terms inside of myself with this. It used to bother me. And one day, it just hit me, maybe right from the core of my soul. What difference does it make, or should it make, whether you are an android created by tall blondes, grays, reptilians, blues, oranges, the list goes on? If you feel an allyship with the force, with the divine field that is responsible for all matter worlds, no matter how big eternity is, to me, that is your soul. And that says to me that humans, no matter whose androids we might have been or be, we have souls. And that the souls, by every philosopher, everyone who has ever lived and written, the souls are the links to the divine field in which there is no entropy. It is Alpha to the Omega. It is the divine behind all the matter worlds. And that the divine field may have created all of this just to test, would bits and pieces of that, the divine field, choose in the matter worlds paths of soul recycling that would end up in the divine field? There have been many philosophers who have written about that. That's what the Gnostics thought. If that's the big box in which all of this is occurring, then there is something that has been new to my thinking in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Compassion. There may be non-humans interacting with this planet because they are at the edge of dying out.
Uh-huh.
Extinction goes with the recycling of life. That extinction goes with DNA.
And as you're talking about this, is there any particular alien type or group that you're thinking of?
Well, it comes into the Bentwaters case with Jim Pennison. It comes into at least very deeply 6 or 7 other cases that I've really been into. One, I did a 12-part series. He's an insurance detective up in the Northwest. I promised him I would never, ever give exactly where he lives, his name. But I believe this man 100%. And he's just one of the more recent ones. He has had experiences with blondes, praying mantises, and grays. And not everything he's had to deal with has been pleasant at all. And for a long time. But he can come out of this. And I believe he's had face-to-face physical, just like Betty and Barney Hill and everybody else, with something that's not Homo sapiens sapien, that has an interest in this planet, has an interest in humans. And he draws for me in my Earth File series. I have a whole, it's called Joshua Reinhall, Rhinehall. That's the name he gave to use, far afield from his real name, Joshua Reinhall. 12 parts with his drawings of what he has seen that included this. This was a blonde wearing a robe. A lot of abductees say they're shown what they think are holographic screens or maybe a window in a craft. And in this case, the first thing that the blonde did, swept the robed arm, looking, and when they did that, this round, I think it was a round, like a window, opened up in this big room. And the detective is standing there looking at triangular craft and spherical, not this shape, triangles and spheres, fighting outside the window.
Huh.
And the blonde being explains to him that there is a war. It is ongoing, and that the conclusion of the war is not guaranteed. This arm, and in the center of this craft room, a form comes in the middle of the room, and then lines, like thousands of colored lines, start coming from someplace up above into this, we'll call it circular, sort of circular looking structure that has symbol. And then all of these colored lines are coming out of it. And the tall being says, these are the lines of time. This is what you call now. This is what you call the past. We have learned that in order to work with planets and life on other planets, it is better for us to work through the lines of time and fetuses of life through DNA. And it is for us to come in the skies with ships, because then that's in the past. What have people done? When extraterrestrials have come, people have gotten down on their knees. And they're saying, we don't want that. That very issue is addressed in this abduction.
That's fascinating.
We do not want humans getting down on their knees to us. So we choose to work through time and genetics. And all of a sudden, it was like the animal mutilations, the human abductions, as difficult and terrifying and repulsive as they have been, and sometimes positive to the humans with recovery and health.
Oh, yeah.
If we knew the whole huge big picture, we might have great compassion that there are other intelligences that actually are trying to the best of their ability to preserve Homo sapiens sapien going forward in time and not being annihilated by something that thinks it has the right to annihilate anything that it has made.
Wow. Well, now we're getting into the real inner core of some of your major conclusions. We'll be right back with Linda Moulton Howe.
Dark journalist. The truth is never easy. Top guest, like financial expert Catherine Austin Fitz.
We have to ask and try and answer the question, what in the world are the UFOs?
Nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman.
You got records, you got bodies that proves we're being visited, case closed.
Historian Richard Dolan.
I hope listeners realize that this is not a run-of-the-mill interview that I do.
Scholar Joseph P. Farrell.
If you don't consider the black budget, then you're missing over half of the financial picture.
Interviews like you've never heard before.
You know, we need dark journalists, so just keep doing what you're doing.
Visit darkjournalist.com.
And here we go. This is Dark Journalist, continuing with investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe. Now, Linda, one thing I think would be tremendously helpful at this point, since you're mentioning types of ET visitors, with all your knowledge and background on this, can you describe the characteristics of just those three types you've mentioned? So that would be the Nordic blonde type, the praying mantis, and the gray with the large eyes.
One big edit here.
Sure.
This is a refinement. Thank you. I'm sorry, but it's as if I'm in a moving river and there's new information all the time.
Oh, please, go for it.
I personally think that the correct delineation, which was absolutely in the 1983 document I saw at Kirtland, they had capital T, little a, little L, S, talls, and gray ebons in that document that I saw. The talls were never characterized as blonde, brown, red, anything.
Okay.
What I have been learning recently is that there is a tall group. There are shorter groups. There are scaled groups. And that the tall ones stand out because they're tall, whether they have any hair at all, whether they have red hair, blonde hair, brown hair, they're tall. They're 7 to 8 feet. That's tall to humans. So we have been conditioned again to think that there are tall Nordics because they do come up. But the tall with blonde hair is only a part of the talls.
Yes.
So I think that the more we learn, and those of us who get exposed, we should try to keep refining everybody else's ability to think about this
in more detail.
Yeah, that there are tall types. And even among the tall types, this has been a recent revelation. I talk about it in Glimpses Volume 2 in abduction cases to some degree, but this is now more of a recent and firm division. Among the tall types, there are talls like Prometheus who think we should have the right to live and be alive and keep evolving. But there are other talls that take a kind of Nazi point of view.
Uh-huh.
We made you, so we have the right to destroy you or anything we do. So then that means it would really be difficult. You would have you would have things that look the same, but they are on opposite political sides over us.
Yeah.
And that the grays may be divided into factions, the scaled ones may be divided into factions. So the landscape becomes as complicated as the Earth and ISIS in the Middle East and everything that's going on now, just writ large. And that's why, if it's that complicated, if the big story is what is allowable to do with life, it really does come back to believing that you have a soul, that there is the recycling of souls is the machinery of the universe. Reincarnation is real. We go in and out of a variety of bodies, and in that, the intelligence of the soul and its experience grows, and that eventually, if you look back from far enough toward the divine field, this is like the bubbles of froth on the sea. It's as if the soul itself must go through the yin and yang, the black and the white, in order to come to some experiential knowledge. And that choices are made out of knowledge, not with somebody with a whip. And somehow we're in the froth. Earth is in the froth. Evolving primates are really in the froth. And maybe out of all of this, that if we could just get past all the lies, all the concoctedness of the planet, and everybody knew the same truth, and there no longer was a 1/2 or 1%. They were the only ones allowed. And we might really be on a planet that was the way the United States felt to me when I was growing up.
Fascinating. Yeah, I can imagine. Well, you also see a powerful influence from ET intelligence in our ancient past. And of course, you regularly appear on the Ancient Aliens TV show. But it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your conclusions on this line up very closely with the work of the late Zecharia Sitchin. And he wrote about the Anunnaki visiting early Sumerians and the two powers, one being called Enlil and the other Enki. And they had a lot to do with human development at that time.
Enki and Enlil.
Right.
Enki, E-N-K-I, was like the Prometheus character in the Greeks. Enki loved humans and thought we had a right to live. Enlil, who was responsible for overseeing our creation for their labor to go down in gold mines and do that sort of thing. Enlil thought that we should be destroyed once they were through. That's been the historic argument from the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, what was always considered mythology. See, it was safe. Anything that's put in mythology is safe. So when you bring it out of mythology and you say 5,000 years ago, tall extraterrestrials, maybe from Mars and Sirius and Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 as 2 or 3 new downloads from Air Force colonels seem to suggest that it's becoming more of a story that we're at a long line from Zeta Reticuli, Sirius B, Mars, and a history that someday maybe humanity in the far future will be told about the truth there. And we then are at the third planet from this sun, with only the current standing up primate only has 35,000 years. And the Neanderthal story and the Mesopotamian Sumerian story, in an odd sort of way, to me, they sort of link in my mind for this reason. If the Enlil Enki extraterrestrial factions, and remember we're talking about one type that split into two parties, one wants us to stay alive, one does not.
Right.
35,000 years ago, give or take, Neanderthalensis had been on the planet for quite a long time with a bigger cubic brain capacity than Homo sapien. We now know that Neanderthalensis buried its dead, put flowers on the graves because scientists have now found the pollen. There is now work going on in France, Spain, and that area where they have now been able to carbon date. And they know that some of the fascinating geometric wall paintings were done by Neanderthalensis 45,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens sapien, this modern model, ever walked the planet. And where I'm coming is Enlil, Enki, historically, mythologically, have an argument about what to do with the life, as Zecharia Sitchin says that he translates. They made you, they made you. They wanted you to be the ones who could breathe the oxygen and mine the gold and do all this. They didn't want to do it. They couldn't live in this oxygen atmosphere like these that they made. They get into a fight. Well, that was 5,000 years ago. I'm going back 35 to 40,000 years ago. What is it that caused Neanderthalensis to be replaced by Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien? Was it ETs? And if it were ETs, what was it that they wanted in Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien that they didn't have in Neanderthalensis? Why are humans so violent? Is there something about death itself that is being studied or used? Would that then translate into how do you move dimensions? How do you move point to point? What is the translation technology for me to get up right in front of your camera and literally disappear? Because I have generated a field that I have learned how to do that will translate me to literally another dimension, but it can be like walking 2 feet away. There is a possibility. I'm just saying there is a possibility based on some things I've been exposed to, that one of the reasons for human abductions is trying to create a certain combination of a body container and a mind and a soul that can operate in what we would call the extrasensory perception level. Perhaps one of the keys to interdimensional travel is not brute propulsion. Brute, meaning we have fire and we're blasting things off with fossil.
Yeah.
It may be that eventually what we could learn is that all of this experimentation genetically is to try to come up with a species that is strong as a container, but has the ability to open up dimensional doorways.
Oh, interesting.
And if that is the end game, which several people that I respect have suggested, what happens at the moment of death? What happens over and over and over again? The container ceases to be alive because the heart stops pumping. And then the brain is more like the car engine. Keeps the car going. But if all of the near-death experiences and what one author calls death travelers, because they've been medically dead and they still see and they still have vast experiences and they still have their heart be brought from a flat line and their brain brought from a flat line, and they're describing, well, what else could have perceived? You have to come to the soul. That the soul is the animator, truly, of consciousness, not the brain, which is more like an engine. And that if the soul is the important part in terms of recycling. It's the only part that recycles. Then the idea that we're in a multi-dimensional universe with parallel universes and timelines, that some know how to enter and exit. That's probably the key of what the Department of Defense would like to know. But what if it comes down to a mind or a consciousness soul combination? It has nothing to do with brute force of fuel. And I personally think that's part of how complex all this is.
So this deeper knowledge of the soul and the soul's connection to the greater, let's say, cosmic whole may lead to this understanding that the soul is the vehicle for interdimensional travel, and that this might be what both the off-world visitors and the defense establishment is trying to find out, which would make a great deal of sense and explain why we're left in the dark so much on this. But what are the real implications of this idea?
What if the goal is to take that which works, and that when you look at Plato and you look at all of the old philosophers, they were definitely plugged into something that was saying there is no real death.
Right.
Well, we mourn constantly, every minute of every hour on this planet, over those things that are dying. And if we really did know, we lived it, the wakes of the Catholics would make sense. That it is a celebration of another step in a recycling that's going to go into another container that will have that knowledge from this life, and on and on and on it goes.
Right.
But on this planet, there are societies of humans that have had, I think, some of that perspective. But for the most part, in the 21st century, we are emphasizing only the most physical.
Definitely.
And people are even afraid to use the word soul in some cycles or circles because they feel like it is somehow connected to something that sounds
spiritual.
And if we could connect the knowledge of the soul and all of its recyclings with the engine of the brain and the container of the body, what humans could do would probably shock the universe.
It's an amazing realization and just mind-bending. You can almost feel the real struggle that's going on there behind the scenes. And this brings us to one of the most interesting areas of your research, which is ET resurrection technology. Now, what is the background on this really unusual aspect of your work?
This is my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities.
That's just a really excellent book.
Thank you. And the High Strangeness subtitle, I wanted to put in the second volume. The first one was Facts and Eyewitnesses. And so it was hundreds of photos and documents, and Facts and Eyewitnesses is really, really valuable from an evidentiary point of view. And so High Strangeness, volume 2, I wrote those two books over 8 years, sort of with both of them in my head, one going here and then the next one pushing out. What I didn't know is that when I got ready to start on volume 2, as much as I had about government, military voices and other things, it was as if the universe just started pouring into me all of these cases that I did not know about when I did the first volume in the detail.
So you felt like you were being helped.
Yeah. So it reinforced that I needed to take this difficult subject of resurrection technology, or whatever word you want to use, that a whole bunch of people were showing me, drawing that they were having these cases. And this is why I'm saying it's like, it's so odd that when you live life, it's almost sometimes exactly when you need information, it comes into your life. Because before that moment, you would never have needed it or understood it.
Right.
So I met every single person who was in that huge chapter on this topic.
Yeah.
And what it comes down to is...
I just want to briefly mention here that it seems like it made a deep impression upon you.
It did, because if you're in my shoes, I don't sit in front of people and show them what everybody else has drawn or said. I'm there as a blank page for every person. And it's when I see 6 people in 6 different states, and they're drawing tubes with humans in them, ETs in them, going into descriptions about seeing one of their bodies dead, allowed to die in the presence of a gray or a praying mantis. And they're shown how the life force from the human moves into a body that they recognize as themselves, maybe 10 years younger. And then they are conscious and you say, what is doing the watching and the listening? One woman in Glimpses Volume 2, there is a woman who sent me her drawing. She was very talented. And she said, this is what's been happening to me since I was a teenager, and sent all these drawings. And they were compelling. And that led to me finally getting to where she lived in California, drove a long way, met. The whole idea was for me to meet her and have her tell me directly what's behind a lot of these drawings. And I recorded it all.
Okay.
And at one point, as she is saying that what looked like a praying mantis showed her a room that was filled with yellow sparkling light, and called it the place of translation. And she didn't understand what that meant. Then from the praying mantis at the room of translation with all the light, she is taken to another room, and it is sort of a gray, a sort of gray, not the big black goggles on. That's why it looks a little different, but a gray, who she understands as a scientist. And he explains, everything's telepathically and by demonstration. Takes her and shows her a man who looks terrible. He's laid out on a slab, and the telepathy is, this is a man who is dying of heart disease. But it is vital that his entity, which she gets in her mind, entity is soul, remain in the same kind of container, his body, not diseased, for X time long. And this is all telepathic with images in her head. So we're showing you what we're going to do to you. He's now dead. The gray takes its long fingers, scoops down into a chest, no blood, but scoops down, and she doesn't know how, pulls up the heart.
Huh.
Extends the heart, no bleeding, diseased, dead. But here he is, and here's one of the rows of tubes, light coming from the top, light coming from below. All these bodies in these tubes. Of the light, she understands, is somehow sustaining in perfection these bodies, these containers.
Now, these are human bodies, right?
Yeah, this is a row of humans, not any ETs.
Got it.
And that all of this is happening rather fast. She sees gold, white light, about 3 feet, come from this part of the man. He's lying on a table, but she sees it come right out of here, which is so interesting that is the old Tibetan Bhutan, the idea that the soul departs the body right here.
So the opposite side from the pineal gland.
The pineal is right back here by about a half an inch or an inch. This is coming up through the dragons of Eden, I suppose is what Carl Sagan would say about here, this base of the brain. But it isn't like it's coming from here, it's coming from here. Here's the spine. And Kundalini has to do with that animating energy of the human container that is related to the spine. And all 6 of these people who have seen this, they see the light leave this way. And it traveled across the room, entered one of the tubes of what looked like this man who died, but 10 years younger. And somehow, this is the part that it's not filled in. Did he animate in the tube and come through the glass and onto the... All she knows is she saw that. And then that man is standing on the floor and she drew it, what she saw. So things are, as always in abductions, they're pieces.
Uh-huh.
People don't have a constant literal, like you could tell every second story. So there are gaps. But it always happens in abductions, and we can't always fill the gaps in. I don't know why. But that sentence, the next sentence was, he will die in his home in Wisconsin or Michigan. That's where he lived. He will be in this body in a new life in Australia. But there will not have been the disconnect between what the entity had learned in that body to when they have some goal that they had for the learning of the soul in that body.
So let me see if I understand this. He'll go and live in Australia for the remainder of this new physical life and continue experiencing and learning. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And it suddenly explains the doppelganger phenomenon that Bud Hopkins and I and Dave Jacobs and John Mack and a bunch of us talked about, probably starting in somewhere in the mid-'80s. There was a period of time where if you were investigating human abductions, you would meet people say, I was taken and they brought out and they showed me my exact mirror opposite. They called it the doppelganger effect.
Right.
So the idea that at one point, perhaps the non-humans were trying to get across this idea. This part doesn't matter, except to what is the goal of the soul. And that you can have a whole bunch of these looking the same, but it's what's inside in the soul that it counts. I mean, it could have been, nobody knows, because the doppelganger only happened in terms of a lot of people talking about it for a very short period of time, and then it just seemed to disappear. I have no idea why. But it may tie into this other thing, that what is happening with abductions, even mutilations, is much more complex than the surface idea of extraterrestrials from someplace coming, gathering sperm, gathering eggs.
So the regular explanation for why all this is happening is probably not the whole story.
I don't think it is. I think it's more along the lines of why that those tubes, there was an abductee who called it the resurrection technology. That's where the phrase, for me, started. And if this is part of the rapid cycle cloning and the hybridization technologies that have been described by people in the government, then that chapter in my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, fills in with illustrations, all of these voices, a part that this one guy who worked for the DIA said, I never thought I would ever see what I thought was the most classified material that we had to deal with. And I open up your book, and there it is with illustrations interviews, transcripts.
That's great.
And I said to him, and this is the truth, this is...
I'm pretty sure you've done that to them more than a few times.
If you guys in the government and military think that you have control over the interaction of extraterrestrials from wherever they come with humans, you're kidding yourself. Because if Truman signed a treaty that he thought that the ETs would check in on lists, which has been described now over and over again. Yeah, you can take a few people for medical, you can take a few animals for your genetic experimentation, but you have to check in with us humans on this list in Washington, D.C. I really think they thought that is the way it would work.
Yeah.
Clearly, it never has worked that way. And today, there are animal mutilations ongoing on the planet. Humans are being interacted with.
Well, this is probably a good time to ask you if you think the abduction phenomena has changed over time. Now, it does seem like the reports are somewhat different somehow.
It's a very good question. I'll tell you what I sense.
Okay.
If Samaria was one time where the extraterrestrials lived among the roly-poly human slaves and allowed themselves to be perceived as gods. They were extraterrestrials, but they let the roly-poly humans think of them as gods.
Uh-huh.
Today, not only do extraterrestrials not exist for humanity as a whole yet, but even gods have become politically charged and controversial vis-a-vis what is happening in the Middle East and the rest of the world.
That's true.
And as bad as it is, it may be that out of this new shift, anything that would come to Earth in a beam of light and try to pass itself off as the overlord god to the planet Earth is going to have quite a tussle.
Definitely.
Some people will automatically go for it. Others will automatically fight it. So that to me is the change. Human consciousness has gone from being the easily manipulatable android that could be farmed, manipulated, dream manipulated, mind manipulated by intelligences just because they were more advanced and they can put holograms out. We don't know that it's not a tree. Those are all parts of the technology.
Sure.
Neutralizing gravity, holograms, we can't tell from the environment around us. Being able to project holograms in the sky if they so choose. Being able to bend space-time point to point. Those are technologies. That would have appeared to human minds 5,000 years ago as magic or gods, if so, introduced to humanity. So I think today it is a blessing and a curse. We are in wars over gods. But it has made us more seasoned, less vulnerable, perhaps. And would we ever be less vulnerable if the governments would just tell us everything? Just to know exactly what our place is in this universe and whatever shows up, to have a taxonomy. You see any of these? Don't worry. You see this one, call us.
Oh.
Why can't we have that kind of relationship? And if we did, and things being able to come to planet Earth and make us get down on our knees and do their bidding, I think would end. And that is not to say that I think there is a powerful other dimensional interaction between what has been called angels, what has been called other dimensions that seem to have a closer relationship to the divine fields. And that's where maybe a whole new language, maybe out of all of this, the froth. We have to get through the froth on the surf. We have to get to the beach, and we have to learn to stand up without killing each other. And once we do, then maybe we can have a relationship that will even allow interdimensional transport.
Well, it could be that in some ways our perceptions have advanced, but would you say overall that now we're better off in terms of our understanding of the alien factor? Or would you say that in the last 20 years or so, we've actually lost some of that awareness?
Generally, I think that the vast majority of humans think all of this is nuts. Specifically because that was the role of World War II counterintelligence.
Yeah.
They want everybody to think it's nuts, it's weather balloons, and anybody who says otherwise is completely off the wall. Which then, what are humans more afraid of than anything? They're afraid of each other, criticizing each other, saying some sarcastic. Humans do not want other humans to think that they're nuts.
Right.
That is working for the government overtime 24/7, 365. So I run into it constantly. I think over the last 35 years that I've probably talked in depth and even recorded interviews with maybe 1,500, 1,600 people in the abduction syndrome.
That's a lot.
Of that many, maybe 20 would be willing to be recorded and probably not use their real name.
That's a pretty small percentage.
Exactly.
That's the reality.
All that the public has ever been exposed to have been the tiny few cases where the people had the courage and the desire out of the same feeling that I have. That's the one thing I can tell you. The human abductees resent the idea that this is happening. It's real. But the government is enforcing it doesn't exist, it's all nuts, go home. To protect government security interests.
Oh, that's such a wall of secrecy there. Now, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but what do you think is actually going on behind the scenes on the government side in relation to the ET presence?
Behind the scenes, they're working with extraterrestrials, back engineering their technology, and they want to access zero-point energy. They want to move dimensions. That's what this government wants. Probably already can neutralize gravity underground.
That seems very likely.
They don't want the surface life to know that. Too hard to control, too hard to manage. Let's go through another 500 years. Let's keep the same mythology for another 500 years. Everything will be that much more manageable. There will be wars. People know how to handle wars. We'll try to keep the wars concentrated in certain parts of the world. I mean, really, this is the way it's going.
Well, Linda, let's go one step further. Now, based on your research, what do you think the relationship is between the government and the ETs?
Well, there's books written by whistleblowers about this.
Yes.
I personally think that two very important books are Helen Luttrell's Rachel's Eyes about the hybrid in Sacramento that lived with her blind daughter at the college. And I think Anthony Sanchez's UFO Highway that goes into the Air Force colonel who did the download. It sounds phantasmagorical, but there are certainly lots of other people who support pieces of it. That this didn't start nearby. The Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, drawn by Betty Hill in the Betty and Barney Hill case, was the origin point for at least some of the extraterrestrials involved with this planet, and paints this whole huge story of migrating 37.8 light years from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 through Sirius B to Mars, what happened in Mars, which eventually I think it will be learned. Some heavy duty stuff went down on Mars.
It looks like we've even found artifacts there.
I think NASA probably knows a lot more than they're ever going to own up to.
Well, if NASA is keeping their discoveries hidden and the government and the military are just putting a veil of secrecy over all of these questions, how are we ever going to get to the truth?
The way I approach this is if you go to a museum where there are French pointillisme, that was a certain kind of art in France, and it's made up of thousands of little dots of color. And the only way that you can literally see a pointillisme in a French art exhibit, you have to back 50, 100 feet away. So the pointillisme was sort of a fad for a while because people loved that idea that you got up close and all you saw were these dots.
Right.
And you come back and then you can see the picture. If you take Anthony Sanchez's colonel, if you take Helen Luttrell's colonel, if you take Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, if you go to Ruppelt in the Air Force, if you take every year, if you went back 60 years, and you took 60 years of the military voices that have managed to reach the public, and you don't say, this is true, you say, take them all, and then put them up like a pointillisme painting. What do you get? And what you get, more than one type of extraterrestrial that's been interacting in this planet. One DIA guy said they had proof in our government of at least 270 million years. That's before the time of the dinosaurs. That there are conflicts, there are struggles, that the struggles are political and they often have something to do with what is allowable to do with life, and that in fact the extraterrestrial conflicts between different types started because one extraterrestrial did something genetically to the other. These are all parts of this pointillisme.
Yeah.
So when you get to Earth and you get to the Eisenhower briefing document and the Majestic 12 and the Psalm 101 briefing, which is a training manual about how you go out and collect craft bodies, dead and alive, how you crate them, where they go, everything. I mean,
and you've done amazing research on Psalm 101.
The Psalm 101 is, I think, it's the most important document that's been released. And Stan Friedman would say the Eisenhower document. You put the two together, you've got a lot of the story.
Absolutely. And if that tells us a lot of the story, what are the sort of crucial missing pieces for you now?
What I'm struggling with after all of this, I accept that there are different extraterrestrials. Some have good intentions, some not so good intentions, that we are in a cosmos that we see white suns in a black sky at night in this Earth, and we see a blue sky during the day. All you have to do is move to Mars or even out to Pluto, and your days and your nights are going to look completely different from where we are here. And if you go to Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, if you go to Sirius, if you go to whatever star system, what the universe keeps showing is that life is down miles in gold mines, in hot sulfur steam cracks in the ocean, up in the Mount Everest, up in the stratosphere. We're now got tests that are bringing back samples that are coming from our own stratosphere. And I think the best you can say as a fact is they're finding unusual things. Is it truly DNA prepared seeds of life by extraterrestrials? I don't know yet, but nevertheless, life seems to be one of those guiding, pushing principles, at least in this universe.
Yeah.
So for the strangest concept of all is that we're alone in the universe. That to me has always been nuts. It's getting past that to we're in a universe teeming with life that the longer we are going, the more we hear back from people who have had near-death experiences or died and were still able to come back. We are only truly glimpsing in human life maybe this much. And it's enough to cause all of the froth that we get on earth. But at the moment of death, if we absolutely knew at the moment of death that the most important part of us, our soul, is going to leave this, and that the options are infinite of where the souls might go because of resonant frequencies that the soul gathers having to do with the choices that it makes going in and out of different containers, then the reason of extraterrestrials that may be having a problem surviving because they're much older, it only makes sense that they would be trying to come up with resurrection technologies and finding planets where they had fresh genetic material. And that there is something at the big picture level, the pointillisme, that I'm not afraid of it at all. I've never been afraid of the animal mutilation, something in me always felt, before you know otherwise, try to have compassion for whatever these beings are that are doing this strange way on this planet. So in the year 2015, going forward, I really, in every ounce of myself, for the sake of humanity, I would like to see all the governments tell the truth, show everything that they have, give us taxonomies, give us the guidance, and then let the human collective, the whole planet, if we could get on the same square, so everybody felt like whatever's going to come in the sky, there's going to be an honest news report on CNN or BBC or wherever about it. And that eventually a feedback of honesty about the non-humans in this universe might actually have a positive impact on people beginning to believe their governments. Who believes anyone in government today?
There's very little trust out there.
And they go into it to make money and lie.
Definitely.
It needs to be turned back around. Those who serve in government should be serving the people. I think that this country was founded on the right idea. So would opening up the truth about this universe, reincarnation, body, mind, and soul, would it stop wars?
Well, that's a powerful question and really cuts to the heart of how important it is to raise our conscious awareness and see through to what's really happening. And I'd like to take a moment here to say that the kind of reporting that you've done, what I call fearless reporting on these difficult subjects, is exactly the bold approach that's necessary. Because when you're talking about ET visitors, there's nothing tentative about it. And you don't say, well, it could be anything. You really deal with the facts. And on this subject, that's very unique.
Well, I think a reporter who sits with a lot of people, sheriffs, other reporters, pathologists, veterinarians, you have to realize I wasn't doing this in a vacuum. Every step has been reaching out to as many people as possible. So when you begin to see the evidence for yourself, and you have other people who are saying, a vet, I opened up these cows for the sheriff's office and they didn't have hearts. They didn't have bladders. There's no excisions. Not to start all over again, but to say the important ground I've been trying to walk all this time has been going for hard physical evidence. And that begins to separate out the people who have real hard knowledge and know this is not speculation about the animal mutilations.
No question.
This is hard physical evidence, and law enforcement knows it.
Just remarkable. You now have a re-release of your Alien Harvest book.
Yes.
It's amazing. The first version was incredible. I can only imagine what's in the new one. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the updates?
Well, an Alien Harvest was like when you feel like you're going to be destroyed or killed. That was the energy. I had been up against a lot of rough things, and I thought, before I die, I have to get out the truth as I knew the truth. Whether it's to 100 people, 1,000 people, I've got to try. And during that period of time when I did an Alien Harvest, I was literally typing on a typewriter, cutting with scissors, taking Scotch tape, and putting the book together like that. Computers were in not a very advanced state in 1988 to 89 when I worked on that book. And I had people who would do the little tiny floppy disks like this. So you could get a little bit on, and then I'd have to take boxes of these to a printer.
Oh, that's great.
And it was like carving the book in granite. And it was like blood, sweat, tears, and skin went into an Alien Harvest. And when I had the first, because it was done as a hardcover in the first edition, in my hands, I had a dear friend with me, and it was spontaneous. I literally fell to my knees, clasping the book, because I was still alive, and the book was there, and I knew that anybody who read it, they would not be getting edited, they would not be getting spin, that everything in there was as close to the truth as I could give on everything. So,
what a great feeling.
That book stayed going on in print, and I kept learning more and more. So what was behind this new second edition of an Alien Harvest that came out in December of 2014, a month ago, was I'm going to update every page. I'm going to add some photos that I didn't even know existed then, and that this is like us recycling. We're talking about recycling of bodies, recycling of timelines.
Yeah.
This was taking, like I could literally grasp a timeline of mine and take that book and reconstitute it into what I knew now and sort of start the cycle again on a fresh place. So an Alien Harvest is like a recycle, a start, a everything that relates to this journey that seems to go like this in cycles of knowledge and geography. And that I hope that people will read an Alien Harvest and Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1 and 2, and Mysterious Lights and Crop Circles, the 4 books I've done so far, and know that this is one Homo sapien sapient who caught on to some of the concoction and tried as hard as she could to tell the truth on a world so concocted that truth is literally a threat to the political forces that run it.
Wow, fascinating. It's just a real education. And if someone wants to know your work, it's right there in this new edition.
Well, there's that edition, and now I'm working on the second edition of Glimpses Volume 1, and I will do a second edition on Glimpses Volume 2.
Oh, this is outstanding. So you're working on those two also, and they're going to have expanded editions with new information.
And for everybody to know, my work at the same price for all these years. It's been 15 years. It's at earthfiles.com because I'm not supplying Amazon. Earth Files is the source.
That's great.
Prices are always reasonable. And it always gets me when people say, well, how can your book cost $2,000? Where does it cost $2,000? Well, there's a hard copy of your first edition on eBay or Amazon. It's $2,000. What? So no.
No already. Well, those classic editions are floating around out there. I've seen them. But better still to go right to the source at earthfiles.com. Earthfiles is an amazing site, by the way. You offer tons of free content to the public, but you also offer a subscription for deeper reading, where you can get files and MP3s of reports, just extraordinary stuff. And anyone who wants the real deal should go to earthfiles.com and get the subscription.
It now has nearly 3,000 reports, and it's something like, we were trying to figure out, it's like 35,000 documents, illustrations, photographs, maps. I mean, all of that work that's in there has really gone pretty deep in some of them. And I am grateful today that I started it sort of as a labor of love. And now it is like a workable encyclopedia for the archives. I use it every day, all the time.
Sure.
And then breaking news as we keep going forward. So Earth Files is like a real crossroads, I hope, for everybody.
Definitely. There's information on the Earth Files site that you just can't get anywhere else. It's really unique and excellent, I think. I use it a lot. Well, Linda, thank you so much for being on the show today. You know, your work is so influential, and there's such an interesting range of knowledge that you've brought together that makes your reporting so fascinating and really essential for getting behind the mystery. The last thing I want to mention is that you're doing a new season of the Ancient Aliens TV show, right?
Yes. And I know that one of the subjects that we're going to be covering is in crop formations. And all I can tell you is I think we're going to do something really special.
That's awesome. We're looking forward to it. Well, I'm really glad we caught up with you today.
I am too.
And you know, even an extended episode doesn't begin to cover all the extraordinary facets of your amazing career and the intelligent analysis you've done on these incredibly complex topics around the ET question.
Well, I'm sure trying. And to anybody listening who has whistleblower knowledge or anything else, please come to me, earthfiles at earthfiles.com. And that's one of the things that's helped me, is that there are a lot of frustrated people out there who have worked in the government and military, and they know truths. And they feel very frustrated that we are going into the 21st century where the planet is still concocted. And they want people like me to know their truth. And then when I report, I think by sort of numbers, some of these numbers of whistleblowers, again, it's the pointillism. No one is saying, here's absolute truth. Not even Zecharia Sitchin would have said that.
Right.
But you add it all together and you start getting a very different story of this planet. And I think that honoring truth is the essence of the divine field for me, and that we should not live on a planet where we're being lied to, and that our relationships with other life in the universe is somehow concocted. We need to know. We need to know what's going on.
Absolutely. And you've helped a lot of those people get their stories out. You know, you've been an incredible channel for that. And I can only imagine the difference that it makes to them knowing that you're out there.
I hope so. I hope it does help.
I'm sure it does. Well, thank you, Linda, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me for this thought-provoking episode with legendary investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe on ET resurrection and interdimensional war. You can find more special reports, interviews, and documentaries at www.darkjournalist.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest videos. See you soon.